Rain drummed against the cracked sidewalk near Pioneer Courthouse Square as Dylan Chen Rodriguez pressed himself deeper into the shadowed doorway of a closed shop. At 15, he had learned that Portland's downtown could swallow someone whole if they weren't careful. 8 months of sleeping rough had taught him to read the streets like a survival manual. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the familiar ache in his chest felt heavier. He clutched the worn backpack that held everything he owned, fingers tracing the faded patches where his mom had once sewn on dinosaur decals when he was 7, back when home meant Vietnamese pho on Sunday mornings, and his dad teaching him Spanish guitar chords on the porch of their East Portland house. Before Instagram betrayed him. Before the photo of him kissing Marcus at Franklin High found its way to his parents' phones. Before the screaming match that ended with his father's words cutting deeper than any knife. The sudden thud of someone hitting pavement snapped Dylan from his memories. Across the square, a woman in an expensive gray coat lay crumpled beside the Max light rail stop. Her briefcase spilled open, papers scattering in the wind like urban tumbleweeds. People hurried past, eyes averted, umbrellas tilted against the rain, and the discomfort of witnessing someone else's crisis. Dylan's first instinct was to melt back into the shadows. Getting involved meant questions, attention, possible police contact, but something about the woman's labored breathing, the way her hands cleared at her chest, triggered a recognition he couldn't ignore. This wasn't a drunk or a drug overdose. This was panic, raw and desperate, the kind that made your world shrink to the size of your lungs. He sprinted across the wet plaza, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected neon signs and streetlights. Kneeling beside her, Dylan noticed details that others missed. Designer shoes scuffed from the fall, a wedding ring catching streetlight, a phone displaying 17 missed calls. This woman wasn't homeless, wasn't forgotten. But right now she was drowning in plain sight just like he had been for months. Her breathing came in sharp gasps, eyes wide with terror that Dylan recognized from his own reflection in storefront windows during those first weeks on the street. Without thinking, he pulled off his only jacket, placing it gently under her head as rain soaked through his thin hoodie. "Hey, it's okay," Dylan said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You're having a panic attack. I'm going to stay right here with you." The woman's eyes found his, confusion mixing with gratitude. Dylan pulled out his battered phone, the screen cracked but functional, and dialed 911. As he spoke to the dispatcher, providing clear details about location and symptoms, the woman's breathing began to slow. Something about his calm presence, his refusal to treat her like a spectacle, created a pocket of safety in the chaos. When paramedics arrived, they found Dylan still beside her, rain-soaked but unwavering. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, she grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice hoarse but determined. "Dylan," he replied, already starting to back away as police officers approached with their standard questions about witnesses and involvement. "Dylan," she repeated, as if memorizing it. "I'm Victoria Hartwell." The name meant nothing to him then, but the way she said it, like a promise rather than an introduction, made him pause. As the ambulance pulled away, Dylan melted back into the Portland night, unaware that he had just saved one of the city's most influential tech entrepreneurs. More importantly, he had no idea that Victoria Hartwell had just experienced her first moment of genuine human connection in years. Back in his doorway, Dylan wrung water from his jacket and tried to process what had just happened. In a world that had taught him to make himself invisible, he had chosen to be seen. The irony wasn't lost on him that in helping someone else breathe, he had found his own breath again, if only for a moment. Sometimes the most profound changes begin not with the grand gestures, but with the simple decision to stay present when everyone else walks away. Dylan had learned this truth the hard way, and tonight, without knowing it, he had planted a seed that would grow into something neither he nor Victoria could yet imagine. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, you won't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe to Heart Stories, where every voice matters and every story has the power to change lives. 3 days later, Dylan was sorting through discarded newspapers outside Powell's Books when a familiar voice called his name. He looked up to see Victoria Hartwell approaching, no longer the woman gasping for breath in Pioneer Square. Today she wore confidence like armor, her dark hair pulled back, eyes sharp with purpose. But Dylan noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way she scanned the crowd as if expecting judgment. Victoria had spent those 3 days tracking him down through security footage and street outreach workers, a task that revealed the invisible network of people society pretended not to see. When she finally found Dylan's usual spots, she realized how precarious his existence truly was. No stable shelter, no consistent meals, no safety net beyond his own resilience. Their conversation began carefully, two people circling the truth like cats around water. Victoria wanted to help, but Dylan had learned that adult assistance often came with strings that could strangle you. When she offered him money, he refused. When she suggested a hotel room, he backed away. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But when Victoria mentioned her own panic attacks, her struggles with anxiety in the male-dominated tech world, something shifted. She spoke about board meetings where she felt suffocated, about sleepless nights when success felt more like imprisonment than achievement. Dylan recognized the familiar weight of carrying secrets, of feeling fundamentally different in spaces where you were supposed to belong. The breakthrough came when Dylan mentioned his former academic performance, how he had maintained a 4.0 GPA at Franklin High before his world collapsed. Victoria's eyes widened with recognition, not pity. Here was intelligence being wasted, potential burning away on Portland streets because a system designed to protect children had failed to protect this one. Their first real obstacle appeared in the form of legal reality. Victoria learned that helping Dylan wasn't as simple as writing a check or making phone calls. As a minor in state custody, technically a runaway from his last foster placement, Dylan existed in a bureaucratic maze that turned good intentions into legal complications. The Department of Human Services caseworker, overwhelmed and managing impossible caseloads, barely remembered Dylan's file. Foster families who might take LGBTQ teens were rare, overloaded, and often geographically distant from Dylan's support networks. The system that was supposed to catch falling children had holes large enough for entire lives to slip through. Victoria's own world began shifting as well. When news of her involvement with a homeless teenager reached her company's board of directors, questions arose about judgment, liability, and public relations. Her girlfriend Sarah initially worried about Victoria's emotional investment, fearing it might trigger another breakdown. The intersection of privilege and genuine care created tensions that neither woman had anticipated. Their relationship developed through small, practical gestures that built trust incrementally. Victoria provided Dylan with a reliable phone plan so he could maintain contact with social services. She helped him obtain a post office box for receiving mail and documents. Most importantly, she listened when he described the daily reality of homelessness that most people never witnessed. Dylan, meanwhile, taught Victoria survival skills she never knew she needed. He showed her how to recognize signs of mental health crisis in others, how to de-escalate tense situations, how to navigate bureaucratic systems that operated on patience rather than urgency. Their mentorship became reciprocal, each learning from the other's different but parallel struggles. The first major setback arrived when Dylan's biological parents, learning of Victoria's involvement through social services, threatened legal action to regain custody. Their sudden interest in their son's welfare came not from love, but from fear that his association with a successful lesbian would somehow validate his identity. The threat hung over everything like a storm cloud, reminding both Dylan and Victoria that acceptance could be weaponized by those who never offered it freely. Winter approached Portland with its characteristic dampness, and Dylan's living situation became increasingly desperate. Shelters overflowed, services stretched thin, and the gap between need and resources widened daily. Victoria watched this intelligent, resilient teenager slowly wearing down under conditions that would break most adults. Yet neither gave up. Victoria began connecting with other business leaders who had experienced their own journeys with LGBTQ identity, building an informal network of support and resources. Dylan started volunteering with younger homeless teens, finding purpose in helping others navigate the system he was learning to survive. Their bond deepened through shared meals at small restaurants where Victoria learned about Dylan's dreams of studying environmental engineering, his worry about climate change, his hope that technology might offer solutions to problems his generation would inherit. In return, she shared stories about building her company from nothing, about facing discrimination in venture capital meetings, about the loneliness that could accompany success. The education that emerged from their relationship went far beyond what either expected, revealing how systems of oppression intersect and how individual connections can begin to bridge chasms that seem impossible to cross. December brought Portland's signature gray skies and a crisis that tested everything Dylan and Victoria had built together. Dylan was arrested for trespassing while sleeping in the doorway of a closed business, spending 6 days in juvenile detention that felt like 6 months. The experience stripped away the fragile sense of security he had begun to rebuild, replacing it with the familiar hollow ache of being unwanted. Victoria's attempts to secure his release revealed how little influence money and connections held within a system designed to process rather than protect. Bail wasn't an option for minors in state custody. Legal representation moved at the speed of overloaded public defenders. The message was clear: Dylan's freedom mattered less than maintaining institutional order. While Dylan sat in detention, Victoria's professional world erupted in controversy. A competitor leaked information about her mentorship to tech blogs, framing it as evidence of poor judgment and instability. The narrative painted her as a privileged executive playing savior while neglecting her corporate responsibilities. Her company lost a major contract when conservative board members at the client organization expressed concern about her associations. The personal attacks stung, but Victoria realized they revealed something larger about how society policed relationships between successful adults and vulnerable youth. Any attempt to bridge class or age divides was suspect, particularly when LGBTQ identity was involved. The system preferred charitable distance to genuine connection, donations rather than relationships, pity instead of recognition. Dylan's release came with additional restrictions and a social worker who viewed Victoria's involvement as inappropriate boundary crossing. The new caseworker, fresh from graduate school but overwhelmed by reality, suggested that Dylan would be better served by maintaining distance from adult mentors who weren't family members or official service providers. Their forced separation lasted 2 weeks, during which Dylan's mental health deteriorated rapidly. Without stable housing or support, he stopped eating regularly, missed appointments, and began showing signs of depression that worried even hardened street outreach workers. Victoria, monitoring from distance through mutual contacts, felt helpless watching someone she had grown to care about spiral downward. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source from Victoria's girlfriend, who had initially worried about their relationship. Working as a nonprofit lawyer, Sarah understood systemic advocacy in ways that Victoria's business background hadn't prepared her for. She suggested that instead of fighting the system individually, they needed to build coalition support for systemic change. Their first ally was Marcus Chen from the Q Center, who had been advocating for LGBTQ homeless youth for over a decade. Marcus introduced them to Outside In, a local organization serving homeless teens, and to foster parents who specialize in LGBTQ placements. What emerged was a network of people who understood that individual cases required community solutions. Dylan, meanwhile, had connected with other homeless teens who gathered at the Central Library during the day for warmth and Wi-Fi access. Their informal support group included Jasmine, a transgender girl aging out of foster care, Alex, whose parents had disowned him for being gay, and Maria, whose undocumented status made accessing services nearly impossible. Each carried wounds that official systems couldn't heal, but they found in each other the family they had been denied. Victoria's company faced additional pressure when an anti-LGBTQ organization launched a boycott, encouraging customers to choose competitors who supported traditional values. Sales dropped, employees worried about job security, and board members questioned whether Victoria's advocacy was worth the financial cost. The stress triggered another series of panic attacks that reminded her why she had collapsed in Pioneer Square months earlier. But the crisis also clarified priorities. Victoria realized that her success meant nothing if it couldn't create space for others to thrive. She made the decision to integrate LGBTQ advocacy directly into her company's mission, hiring formerly homeless youth as consultants and creating internship programs that provided both income and skill development. The legal threat from Dylan's parents materialized when they filed for custody, claiming that Victoria had manipulated their son and disrupted their family. The court case forced Dylan to testify about why he had run away, requiring him to describe his parents' rejection in language that legal proceedings demanded, but that reopened wounds he was still trying to heal. Victoria watched Dylan's testimony and saw not just his courage, but the broader injustice of a system that required children to prove they deserve safety. His articulate description of conversion therapy threats, of being told he was destroying the family honor, of sleeping outside rather than enduring daily psychological abuse, painted a picture that no amount of parental rights rhetoric could justify. The judge ruled in Dylan's favor, but the process had taken months and significant emotional toll. Victory felt hollow when winning meant demonstrating how badly you had been hurt. Dylan emerged from the legal battle more mature but also more cautious, understanding that safety was always temporary for people like him. Through it all, the community that had formed around Dylan and Victoria continued growing. Business leaders began questioning their own company's policies toward LGBTQ employees. Foster families received additional training about supporting queer youth. Local organizations found new sources of funding and volunteer support. What started as one teenager's crisis had revealed gaps that affected thousands of young people, and the response was beginning to match the scope of the problem. Spring returned to Portland with cherry blossoms and tentative hope, bringing changes that neither Dylan nor Victoria had imagined when their paths first crossed. Dylan had secured stable housing through a new transitional program designed specifically for LGBTQ youth being out of foster care, while Victoria's company had become an unexpected model for corporate social responsibility in the tech sector. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Dylan spent 18 months navigating bureaucratic mazes, court appearances, and the slow work of healing from family rejection. Now 17, he moved through the world with quiet confidence earned through survival, his sharp intelligence finally finding appropriate channels for expression. The Breakthrough Project emerged from Dylan's frustration with existing resources for homeless youth. Existing apps and websites were designed by adults who had never experienced homelessness, missing crucial details that could mean the difference between safety and danger for vulnerable teenagers. Dylan proposed creating SafeNet, a peer-designed platform that would provide real-time information about safe spaces, resource availability, and community support. Victoria's initial reaction was protective skepticism. She worried about Dylan taking on too much, about the technical challenges, about potential legal liability if the app was misused. But Sarah reminded her that Dylan's lived experience was exactly what made the project valuable, and that protecting him from challenge wasn't the same as supporting his growth. The development process became a collaboration between Dylan's street knowledge and Victoria's technical resources. Computer science students from Portland State University joined the project as part of their capstone requirements, while social work graduate students helped design safety protocols and crisis intervention features. SafeNet's beta testing revealed gaps in Portland's services that surprised even experienced advocates. Many shelters listed as available were actually full or unsafe. Some resource centers had unofficial policies that discriminated against LGBTQ youth. Information that agencies considered current was often outdated by weeks or months, leaving vulnerable teenagers with dangerous misinformation. Dylan's testimony at the Oregon State Legislature drew on both his personal experience and the data SafeNet had collected. Speaking to lawmakers about the reality of youth homelessness, he avoided the emotional manipulation that often characterized advocacy, instead presenting clear evidence of systemic failures and practical solutions. The proposed Dylan's Law wasn't named for him, though media outlets adopted the term despite his discomfort with the attention. The legislation addressed gaps in services, created dedicated funding streams for LGBTQ youth programs, and established oversight mechanisms to ensure accountability. More importantly, it required that formerly homeless youth be included in designing and evaluating services meant to serve them. Victoria used her platform as a successful entrepreneur to speak at technology conferences about the intersection of business success and social justice. Her presentations challenged other executives to consider how their companies could create opportunities for marginalized communities, not through charity, but through genuine partnership and shared power. The response was mixed but meaningful. Some companies dismissed her approach as unrealistic or politically motivated. Others began examining their own hiring practices, community engagement, and social impact. A few followed Victoria's lead in creating internship programs and consulting opportunities for formerly homeless youth. Back at school, Dylan balanced advanced placement classes with his advocacy work, maintaining the academic excellence that had been interrupted but never destroyed by his family crisis. His college applications included essays about systemic inequality and technological solutions, earning him admission to several prestigious environmental engineering programs. But Dylan chose Portland State University, staying close to the community that had supported him and the work he had helped build. His decision reflected a mature understanding that privilege came with responsibility, and that his success would only matter if it created pathways for others facing similar challenges. Victoria's relationship with Sarah deepened as they navigated the complexities of building a life together while maintaining demanding careers and advocacy commitments. Their engagement announcement included a commitment to donate a significant portion of their wedding budget to LGBTQ youth services, transforming personal celebration into community investment. The SafeNet app launched with coverage of Portland and Seattle, quickly expanding to other cities as youth advocates requested access to the platform. Usage statistics revealed both the scope of need and the effectiveness of peer-designed solutions. Within 6 months, SafeNet was being used by over 500 youth across the Pacific Northwest. Recognition came in forms Dylan hadn't expected. Tech companies offered him lucrative internships. Universities recruited him for their programs, and national organizations invited him to speak at conferences. Each opportunity required careful consideration about how to maintain authenticity while accepting platforms that could amplify his message. The most meaningful recognition came from other homeless youth who used SafeNet to find safety, resources, or simply connection with others who understood their struggles. Their messages reminded Dylan that individual stories could create ripple effects far beyond what any single person could imagine. As Dylan prepared for college, he reflected on how much had changed since that rainy night in Pioneer Square. The scared 15-year-old sleeping in doorways had evolved into a confident advocate and innovative thinker. But the core values that made him stop to help Victoria remained unchanged. His journey illustrated how systemic problems required both individual courage and community response, how privilege could be shared rather than hoarded, and how young people could lead change when given genuine opportunities to do so. 2 years later, Dylan stood before a packed auditorium at Portland State University, delivering the keynote address at a national conference on youth homelessness. At 19, he had evolved from a frightened teenager sleeping in doorways to a recognized advocate whose work was reshaping how communities approached LGBTQ youth services across the country. The SafeNet platform now operated in 15 cities, with over 3,000 active users and partnerships with major social service organizations. But the technology was only part of Dylan's legacy. The deeper change was cultural, shifting how service providers, policymakers, and community members understood the expertise that came from lived experience. Victoria watched from the audience, her pride evident but restrained. Their relationship had evolved into something unique. Neither fully mentor and mentee, nor simply friends, but something deeper and more complex. Victoria had learned as much from Dylan as she had taught him, discovering that true allyship required constant learning and frequent discomfort. Dylan's law had passed the Oregon legislature and been signed by the governor, creating the most comprehensive LGBTQ youth protection legislation in the country. Other states were drafting similar bills, while federal representatives had introduced national versions that drew heavily on the Oregon model. The legislation's impact was measured not just in policy changes, but in individual lives transformed. Jasmine, the transgender girl Dylan had met at the library, now worked as a peer counselor at Outside In while pursuing her nursing degree. Alex had reconnected with his family after they attended education sessions required by the new law. Maria had received protection under immigrant youth provisions that Dylan had insisted be included in the final legislation. Victoria's company had become a case study in business schools, demonstrating how social impact could enhance rather than compromise financial success. The Hartwell Foundation, established with Sarah after their wedding, provided both funding and technical support for youth-led advocacy organizations nationwide. But success hadn't erased the ongoing challenges that LGBTQ youth faced. Dylan was careful not to present his story as a simple triumph over adversity, acknowledging instead how much his outcomes depended on meeting Victoria at exactly the right moment, on finding allies who had resources and influence, on being articulate and academically gifted in ways that made him easier for systems to accommodate. During his keynote address, Dylan introduced Kai, a 14-year-old who had recently aged out of foster care after being rejected by 3 families for their gender nonconformity. Kai's story reminded the audience that individual success stories, while inspiring, couldn't substitute for systematic change that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. The Q Center had established a college scholarship program in Dylan's name, though he insisted it focus on youth whose paths to higher education were less conventional than his had been. The first recipients included former sex workers pursuing social work degrees, undocumented immigrants studying law, and youth with disabilities who had been written off by traditional educational systems. Victoria's keynote speech at the same conference focused on the business case for supporting LGBTQ youth, but she spent most of her time discussing what she had learned about privilege, power, and genuine partnership. Her relationship with Dylan had challenged her assumptions about charity versus solidarity, about helping versus supporting, about speaking for others versus amplifying their voices. The conference concluded with the announcement of a new initiative, a national network of youth-led advocacy organizations that would receive funding, technical support, and political backing to address local manifestations of systemic problems. Dylan would serve as the network's first youth coordinator, a role that would allow him to continue his advocacy work while pursuing his environmental engineering studies. As attendees dispersed to airports and hotel rooms, carrying new ideas and renewed commitment back to their communities, Dylan found himself in conversation with a group of teenagers who had traveled from various cities to attend the conference. Their questions reminded him of his own uncertainty just a few years earlier, their hope and vulnerability recognizable in ways that made his chest tighten with memory and determination. One girl, maybe 16, asked him if things really got better or if that was just something adults said to keep kids quiet. Dylan considered the question seriously before answering that things could get better, but only if people were willing to work for change rather than wait for it. Later that evening, Victoria and Dylan sat in a quiet restaurant, reflecting on how far they had both traveled since that night in Pioneer Square. Their conversation ranged from policy details to personal growth, from legislative strategy to the small daily choices that created space for healing and transformation. Dylan mentioned his plans to return to Portland after graduation, to continue building the community that had saved his life, and to ensure that other young people wouldn't face the isolation he had experienced. Victoria nodded, understanding that home wasn't just a geographic location but a network of relationships and shared purpose. As they prepared to part ways for the evening, Victoria asked Dylan what he hoped people would remember about their story. He thought for a moment before responding that he hoped people would understand that everyone had the capacity to recognize crisis and respond with courage, that helping others was often the first step toward healing yourself, and that sustainable change required both individual compassion and systemic transformation. Their story continued in the lives they had touched, the policies they had influenced, and the communities they had helped create. It lived in every young person who found safety through SafeNet, in every family that learned to love their LGBTQ children unconditionally, in every organization that centered the voices of those they claimed to serve. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you stopped walking past someone else's crisis and chose instead to stay present? How might your own life be transformed by the simple act of witnessing another person's humanity? Dylan and Victoria discovered that saving someone else can often be the beginning of saving yourself, and that the most profound changes often start with the decision to see and respond to what others choose to ignore. If their journey has moved something in you, we invite you to share this story and follow Heart Stories for more real conversations about courage, community, and the connections that transform ordinary moments into extraordinary opportunities for change.